Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi, and I'm here to give you some of our quick picks for Thursday's slate of college football games. DraftKings switched up the way that they do their rosters this year, so the tight end position is no longer one that you have to roster, and they added in an extra flex spot, which is really going to change the dynamic of how everything goes. You're not going to be able to fit a whole bunch of studs into your lineup, so you are going to have to find some value throughout there, but there are a couple guys at the high end that I did want to mention. Starting at the quarterback spot, the one guy who I like the most is Brandon Daugherty. He's the quarterback for Western Kentucky, led the nation last year with over 4,800 passing yards and 49 touchdowns. He's a little bit pricey on the slate today at a price of $9,000, but he does play in the highest over-under game and one that's expected to have a close spread, so it should be back and forth with him throwing the ball quite a bit. He's my number one option up top. If you want to look for some other quarterbacks up top, you're probably not going to be able to pay up for two big studs. So I'm taking him over guys like, Trevon Boykin, Marquise Williams, Anu Solomon. He's my favorite option of those guys at the top end. But the other three guys all have merit as well. I just really like the game situation, the game flow, and the fact that, he's somebody who's going to be slinging the ball around 40 to 50 times on Thursday. If you're looking at the lower end, which you're going to have to in order to fit in two quarterbacks on a two-quarterback system here, I really like a guy like Travis Wilson from Utah. Wilson is that dual threat kind of quarterback that we really like. He can get you 50, 60 yards on the ground with a possible score, probably somewhere between 10 to 15 carries. And he's also going to throw the ball somewhere between 20 and 25 times for about 200 yards through the air and maybe a couple scores there as well. I do like their matchup that they have today against Michigan, so I think he's going to be somebody that you have to consider. If you're looking for another low-end option, I also really like Duke quarterback Thomas Sirk. He's only $6,000, so him and Wilson are in that same price range. I think I like Wilson a little more because I think I'm a little bit more certain of the outcome that he's going to get me than I am of the one with Sirk. But Sirk is another guy who I'm hearing a lot of people talk about, and I think both of them are going to be guys that you're going to need to include in order to be able to pay up at other spots for some of the big studs. Next spot I want to talk about is moving over to running back. My top running back on the day is going to be Nick Wilson from Arizona. Now, Arizona should be up big in this game. They should run away with this one. I don't think that the UTSA defense is going to be able to stop them. So if you have a guy like Nick Wilson, I think he's going to be able to get a lot of yards for you, maybe rack up a couple touchdowns. And my biggest fear is that he's not going to get a whole game full of carries, because if it does turn into a blowout, I don't think he's going to get a lot of carries and a lot of touches late. Another running back in the mid-tier price range who I really like is A.J. Ouellette from Ohio University. Ouellette looks like he's going to be ready to step up and be that, number one workhorse back here. He had a pretty decent season last year. Seems to be healthy this year. They said he put on a little bit of weight as well, so he can take the pounding a little bit better. His price is very reasonable at only $6,400, and I think he's going to be one of my top options on the day here. You're also going to need to find a couple cheap guys to put in there, and there's two guys that I want to mention. The first guy I like is Elijah Penny from Idaho. My only fear with him is that if they're behind, they might not be running the ball as much as they should be. But he was a workhorse back for them towards the end of last season, getting 15 to 25 carries a game. Does a little bit of work in the passing game, although nothing spectacular to write home about. I would like it a lot better if I thought that they were going to be winning and running out the clock late. But I do think Penny at a price of only $3,800 is somebody who you really can't ignore here today. Another guy down at the cheap end who I think you might want to look at is Elijah Hood from North Carolina. Hood seems to have wrestled away the starting running back job, and his price is very, very cheap. He's below $4,000 over on DraftKings at the running back spot today. So if you are going to pay up for some of these studs, you're going to need some of these guys like Penny and Hood in order to make sure that you can fit in, a high-priced quarterback or a high-priced wide receiver if that's how you choose to go at it. Last thing I want to mention, there's a couple other guys, Leon Allen, Devontae Booker, Aaron Green, and Shaquille Powell. Those are some other guys who I've been looking at the running back spot today. But again, they're a tick below the guys who I mentioned already, either based on price or the game flow situation that they could be in. The next thing I want to talk about is wide receiver. Now, obviously, if you like a guy like Doty and you think that game is going to turn into a shootout, you got to look at some of the receivers there. And the guy who stands out to me right away is going to be Jared Dangerfield. Dangerfield is $5,900 for Western Kentucky. He set school records with 69 receptions last year and 11 touchdowns, so I definitely think he's somebody who can take a step forward here. He was a young wide receiver last year. He was the number one option on that team, and he was the guy who Doty looks to the most. So this year, I think he's going to be able to step up. he's only 5,900, and I think he can have one of those games where he puts up 6 to 8 catches, 120 to 140 yards, and maybe a touchdown or two in what's expected to be a shootout. They're expecting 35 points out of this Western Kentucky team. So of those 5 touchdowns, it wouldn't shock me if Dangerfield had at least half of them. Next guy I want to talk about, another big-time wide receiver I like, Brandon Shepard. Shepard had a really good close to last season, so it looks like he's ready to take that next step forward here for OK State. The game flow is the only thing that really concerns me a little bit about him. I like the price of $6,000. I think that's a pretty good value for him. He's somebody who had a bunch of big catches and a lot of yards at the end of last season. So I think he's ready to, take that next step forward and be a top wide receiver here. He's, like I said, his price is reasonable enough that you can fit him in there. And I think he's going to have a big game here today, as Oklahoma State has always been a team that likes to put the ball in the air. Last guy I want to talk about is Latavius Rayford from Vanderbilt. Now, if you look at this guy's stats, there's nothing that really jumps off the page at you. But their number 1 wide receiver was already injured and is out for the year. So Rayford's going to be stepping into that role. That should mean that he sees a couple extra targets, probably in the 10 to 12 range in this game here. And if he can come up with 6 or 8 catches for you, get, 60, 80, 100 yards and a touchdown at a price of only $4,000, I think he's a very reasonable person to look at, basically with the guaranteed extra volume that he should be picking up here today. Those are 3 of the top options that I like. You can also look at guys like Caleb Jones, Samaje Grant, Kenneth Scott, and Taywan Taylor towards the top end. Quinchard Davis and Ryan Switzer from University of North Carolina. That's a big, big spread game that should see a little bit of passing. Marquise Wilson, the quarterback for North Carolina, does tend to do a lot of damage with his legs on the ground now. So I don't really like taking his receivers expecting a huge game out of him. He's not a sit-back pocket passer. So I don't think he's going to be throwing for, 40 times for 300 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns on the day, which means that I don't think his wide receivers are going to have huge numbers. But they are reasonably priced. But the problem is you have to pick which one of those 2 guys you really want to use. Let's see. We also have guys like Jonnu Smith, big tight end from Florida International. He's somebody that I think is going to fly under the radar, especially since you don't have to roster a tight end this year. If a tight end was something that you had to put in your rosters this season, I think he would probably be the highest owned tight end on the day. So without having to use a tight end, I think people are going to wind up putting an extra running back or an extra wide receiver in there. And I think you can get a guy like Smith at a low ownership rate as well. And the last guy is another guy from Western Kentucky, Antoine Grant. Grant is a nice little receiver that they have there, and because of the volume of passes that they throw on that team, I think there's enough there to feed more than one guy. Grant's price is only $3,800, so he's below $4,000, and he's probably one of my favorite wide receiver options that's that cheap on the day and still has a chance for some upside. Again, he's not going to be the guy that catches you 10 or 12 balls, but if he can get you 4 or 5, maybe one big one for 35 or 40 yards and a touchdown, he's going to more than pay off his salary. So that pretty much wraps it up for our college football look at Thursday night. We got a 9-game slate coming up, so make sure you guys get those rosters in. There's a blog post that goes along with this that has a lot of my thoughts on some of these guys that we mentioned, and I'll be coming at you probably either later on today or tomorrow with an update for Saturday's college football games as well. So thank you guys for joining us here at RotoCurve, and as always, stay classy, DFS.